The Palliative Society by Byung-Chul Han. The Last Man. Francis Fukuyama's book, The End of History, is not just a one-sided encomium to liberal democracy in the context of the demise of communism. In fact, it is pervaded by ambivalence. The last part of the book, titled The Last Man, states that liberal democracy produces the kind of palliative society symbolized by Nietzsche's last human being. This is a society of permanent anesthetization, a bit of poison once in a while that makes for pleasant dreams, and much poison at the end for a pleasant death. One has one's little pleasure for the day and one's little pleasure for the night, but one honors health. We invented happiness, say the last human beings, and they blink. Fukuyama proceeds from the anthropological thesis that megalothemia, a striving after superiority, fame, and honor that takes on heroic proportions, is essential to the human being. It is also the driving force of history. But in liberal democracy, this megalothemia is tempered by esothemia, that is, a striving for equality with others, and a more intense striving after convenience and security. Liberal democracy thus leads to the emergence of the last man. To the extent that liberal democracy is successful at purging megalothemia from life and substituting it for rational consumption, we will become last men. But the emergence of the last man is not, as Fukuyama claims, necessarily bound up with liberal democracy. Rather, the last man is a proper phenomenon of modernity. The last man does not necessarily prefer the liberal system. He is, for instance, quite happy to live under a totalitarian regime. Today, China is just as populated by last men as the US. Everywhere, heroism gives way to hedonism. It is for this reason that Jünger turns decidedly against modernity. In On Pain, he invokes the end of the age of the last man. The breadth of people partaking of goods and pleasures is a sign of prosperity. Here, one senses the dreamlike, painless, and oddly agitated ease that fills the air like a narcotic. The individual is greeted by a wealth of conveniences. The potential for conflict is thereby avoided. What is more, a quality of pure convenience is still an integral part of the fabulous expansion of technical means. It all seems designed to light up, warm, move, entertain, and deliver streams of gold. The prophecy of the last man has found rapid fulfillment. It is accurate, except for the assertion that the last man lives longest. His age already lies behind us. Looking forward to the year 2000, Jünger writes, "The last man, as Nietzsche prophesied, is already history, and even if we have not yet reached the year 2000, it seems certain it will look entirely different than depicted in Bellamy's Utopia." Jünger's reference is to the pain-free society of Edward Bellamy's utopian novel Looking Backward, 2000 to 1887. We must presumably conclude that Jünger's prediction was mistaken, for the 21st century is precisely the age of the last man. The heroic age between the two world wars invoked by Jünger was only a brief episode. The palliative society of the 21st century dismisses any kind of heroic demeanor. Fukuyama's prediction has also turned out to have been mistaken. History did not end with the triumph of liberalism. In particular, there is currently widespread support for right-wing populism.
The left has gotten so bad that vegan, avocado toast eating lesbians have left the left.
From 2020.
And autocracy. As a survival society, the palliative society does not necessarily depend on liberal democracy. In the face of the pandemic, we are drifting towards a regime of biopolitical surveillance. Western liberalism seems to be failing to rise to the challenge posed by the virus, and we will soon realize that in the fight against the pandemic, the focus must be on the behavior of each individual.
It's a lockdown, which means you don't just come in sunbathe. Can you please just leave? The government has a lockdown in force. Can you please get off the grid? Go home.
on street, so an enormous amount of police are now gathering.
It's the most important commitment for Victoria Police, crossing the Chief Health Officer guidelines. Totally fundamental.
Well, Victoria Police will take whatever steps they need to take. Protests don't work, protests are not smart, they're not lawful.
No.
It's illegal. All of it can be avoided if people don't protest.
But the biopolitical surveillance of the individual does not sit well with the principles of liberalism. Under the influence of the hygienic dispositif, the society of survival will find that it is forced to give up those liberal principles. The regime of digital surveillance, taking on proto-totalitarian traits by now, is already undermining the liberal idea of freedom. The individual has been transformed into a data set and exploited for profit. Capitalism has developed into surveillance capitalism. Surveillance generates capital. Digital platforms subject us to constant surveillance and manipulate our behavior. Our thoughts, feelings, and intentions are read and exploited. The Internet of Things extends this surveillance into real life in the physical world. Wearables expose our bodies to commercial exploitation. We are like marionettes being directed by algorithmic strings. The psychopolitical instrument of big data renders human behavior predictable and controllable. Digital psychopolitics creates a crisis of freedom. In connection with the census in West Germany in the 1980s, there was widespread protests against the collection of data. The suspicion was that behind the census lurked a surveillance state that threatened liberal freedom. From today's perspective, the information requested was rather innocent: educational qualifications, profession, religion, and yet even school children took to the streets. Today, we voluntarily give away even the most intimate personal data. We expose ourselves not because we are compelled to do so, but out of an inner need. We allow all aspects of ourselves to be scrutinized. Domination becomes total the moment it coincides with freedom. What we are witnessing here is a dialectic of freedom. The freedom of limitless communication turns into total surveillance. Why should this enormous apparatus of digital surveillance, already implemented and meeting with little resistance, stop short of the virus? Rather, the pandemic will soon dissolve the inhibition which has hitherto prevented the biopolitical expansion of digital surveillance down to the level of the individual. According to Naomi Klein, the moment of shock is the perfect opportunity to establish a new system of domination. The shock of the pandemic will ultimately lead to the triumph of a global biopolitical surveillance regime that permits access to the body. Only digital biopolitics can inoculate capitalism against the pandemic. Digital biopolitics closes a systemic gap, but the biopolitical regime of surveillance spells the end of liberalism. Liberalism will prove to have been merely a historical episode. The last man is not a partisan of liberal democracy. For the last man, comfort is a higher value than freedom. The illiberalism of digital psychopolitics does not disturb him. His mania for health is such that he is constantly monitoring himself. He erects an internal dictatorship, a regime of control inside himself. Where an internal dictatorship confronts biopolitical surveillance, it does not perceive it as oppressive, for this surveillance comes in the name of health. Within the biopolitical regime, then, the last man feels free. Domination and freedom again coincide. Nietzsche already saw the pain-averse, palliative society coming. It will come one day, that hour that will envelop you in a golden cloud where there is no pain, where the soul has the enjoyment of its own wariness, and, happy in a patient game with its own patience, is like the waves of a lake which, reflecting the colors of an evening sky on a quiet summer's day, lap and lap against the bank, and then are still again. Without end, without aim, without satiation, without desire, all repose that rejoices in change, all ebbing back and flooding forward with the pulse beat of nature. This is how all invalids feel and speak. But if they do attain to that hour, there arrives after brief enjoyment, boredom. Fukuyama entertains the possibility that man, out of unbearable boredom, might set history in motion again. That the society of last men might give way to a society of bestial first men, a society of uninhibited megalothemia. But there will be no such return to the past. An altogether different future awaits us, the post-humanist age in which the last man and his boredom will have been overcome. In The Hedonistic Imperative, the transhumanist David Pearce declares that the future will be pain-free. Over the next 1,000 years or so, the biological substrates of suffering will be eradicated completely. Physical and mental pain alike are destined to disappear into evolutionary history. The pain of love, those soul-destroying cruelties of traditional modes of love, will also be overcome. The aim of transhumanism is a sublime and all-pervasive happiness. Transhumanism leaves behind even the last man because, as Pearce might say, he is still all too human. He is beset with boredom. Transhumanism believes that even boredom can be overcome through biotechnology. Whatever humanity's contemporary failures of imagination, within a few generations, the experience of boredom will be neurophysiologically impossible. Against boredom, even the gods struggle in vain, said Nietzsche. But he failed to anticipate biotechnology. The pain-free life of permanent happiness is not a human life. Life which tracks down and drives out its own negativity cancels itself out. Death and pain belong together. In pain, death is anticipated. If you seek to remove all pain, you will have also to abolish death. But life without death and pain is not human life. It is undead life. In order to survive, humans are abolishing themselves. They may succeed in becoming immortal, but only at the expense of life itself. The Palliative Society, Byung-Chul Han. Thank you for watching. Check out our other videos and playlists on the Unism channel if you're interested in controversial thought meant to help us usurp the future and eclipse the past. But otherwise, there's not much to say other than we will see you in the circle.